our Pacific Plastic Science to Solution podcast, where we will discuss the amazing research we've been doing to address positive change to the East Pacific coast to preserve biodiversity and the environment. So I'm Gianilú Chávarry, Science Communicator from the Peruvian Life Cycle Assessment and Industrial Ecology Network from the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. And I would like to present our guests today. First of all, we are with Dr. Ceri Lewis.
Hello.
Ceri is an associate professor in marine biology who has led high-profile field-based campaigns to study the distribution and impacts of plastic pollution, establishing international projects in the Arctic, the Azores, and the Galapagos Islands. She is one of the principal researchers of our project, alongside Dr. Tamara Galloway. And also, we are with Lara Pinheiro.
Hello.
Lara is a doctor in environmental biologist with nearly 10 years of research experience in coastal plastic pollution, including different environments such as sandy beaches, mangroves, and salt marshes. She is currently a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Exeter, working on the PPSS project. And finally, last but not least, we are with Andrea Osorio. She is an environmental engineer specialized in the marine environment, with experience in recycling programs, plastic pollution and laboratory research, mapping and satellite imagery analysis, and environmental education. Also, Andrea is passionate about photography and videography. She is currently a research technician at the University of Exeter, working also on the PPSS project. Hi, Andrea.
Hello.
So, who we are? We are here part of the Pacific Plastic Science to Solution Network. This project brings together an international partnership whose mission is to reduce plastic leakage in the Eastern Pacific region to conserve our oceans, protect marine wildlife, and support people whose livelihoods depends on the health of this unique ecosystem. Our network is big. We collaborate with 20 organizations across 5 different countries from different areas. We work closely with Galapagos Islands and the Eastern Pacific, such as the Galapagos National Park and the Galapagos Research Center, among others. We also work with the academia, with research groups from different universities like Ecuador, Peru, Chile, Netherlands, and the UK. Also NGOs such as Galapagos Conservation Trust, Prodelfinos, Fundación Circular, government groups like IMARPE, some citizens science networks, and social enterprises with a circular economy focus. So after this big introduction, I would like to start asking you, Ceri, how this project started. Can you tell us how was all this amazing journey?
Yeah, absolutely. This project actually started 7 years ago now, in 2018. And we've been working on the impacts of plastic pollution at Exeter University for a really long time. And we got an interesting email from Juan Pablo Muñoz Perez of the Galapagos Science Centre in the Galapagos Islands, working with Galapagos Conservation Trust, and he is a turtle conservation ecologist. And whilst he was studying the turtles of the Galapagos Islands, he started to notice the huge amount of plastic pollution building up on those islands. And so we wanted to go and help him understand the nature of that pollution problem. So he invited us out, and of course you don't say no to going to visit the Galapagos Islands. They're these incredibly beautiful islands, famous for their endemic wildlife, inspired Darwin's theory of evolution. You know, that it's an iconic place to go and see wildlife, but unfortunately it's also a place where plastic is accumulating. And so we started off going out to these islands and collecting some of that first baseline data to understand how much plastic there was, and to try and start to work out how it might be moving around the islands and where it might be coming from. So we collected all sorts of really important data, but we very quickly realised that to understand, where the plastic was coming from, we needed much bigger research programmes. We started working with oceanographic modelers who taught us that the plastic was coming in mostly from mainland Ecuador and Peru. Mm-hmm. And so we conceived this much bigger programme spanning out from Galapagos back to the mainland, because that's the source of much of the pollution that's ending up in Galapagos. And so we were very lucky that we were able to build this wonderful network of people from across all of these different organisations to tackle all aspects of that plastic pollution problem in the Eastern Pacific. with Galapagos as the kind of starting point for that journey, but reaching out much more broadly to look at the bigger scale of plastic pollution across the Eastern Pacific.
Amazing. So I know that our project has these three focus that are the sources, the impacts, and also the solution. We have this circular system. And maybe we can start talking about the sources of this marine litter in the Eastern Pacific. So maybe Andrea, can you start talking about this?
Yes, so about the sources, well, previous studies in the world have estimated that 80% of plastics are entering through the rivers. And well, specifically in Galapagos, our research in the field and by modelers, as Ceri say, have found that most of the plastic that wash up comes from Peru and Ecuador, because we have found big items that we call macroplastics with labels that are coming from these countries. As well, we are finding a lot of items with labels from Asia, but it's very not probable that they are coming all the way from Asia. So what this is suggesting is that it's known that there are fishing fleets that are fishing around the Galapagos Marine Reserve, and then many of these are Asian, and so these plastic items that we are finding probably are coming from these sources. So these are the big plastics, but as many of you have heard about, there are some microplastics, which are these tiny, tiny little plastics. Some of them we can see them, but some of them we can almost not see them. They are very, very, very small. So the problem is like this, all of these big plastics are arriving in the Galapagos area, and they are fragmentating due to the UV, because we have a lot of sun in the equator, right? And also because of the sea. Mm-hmm. So these are factors that can fragmentate. We have found some differences between some areas. So for example, we are conducting our study in Santa Cruz, which is the eastern island of the Galapagos archipelago. In the east area, we are finding mainly particles, big particles, because of these macroplastics are arriving and they are fragmentating in there. While in the west side, we are finding more fibers, because these are closer to the urban areas. So we are finding mainly fibers in these areas.
Andrea gave really good examples of how the plastics that we find in Galapagos, for example, can be from marine sources, but we also have lots of land-based sources, so plastic that comes from that are produced in the continent or in the land areas of the archipelago. So, for example, we do find and we see lots of packaging that can be used in the island or used in the mainland in Ecuador or Peru or Chile. That can be seen as a land-based source. Of course, these are called single-use plastics, so the plastics that we use once and very quickly we throw them away. So the life cycle is very, very short, so they can become this big problem of an example of a land-based plastic.
Yeah, just to give an example of the sort of numbers that we're finding, we did one little survey on a beach on a otherwise beautiful part of Galapagos and found 156 bottle caps in just 25 metres of beach. So you can instantly see some of these numbers get very big very quickly on just how much plastic is washing up.
Yeah, I think it's great that we have these ocean-based sources, but also land sources. And in this way, we have a lot of sources. So thank you so much, girls. Now, talking about the impacts that we have found in the project, I know that we have the impacts on biodiversity, such as in animal species and mangroves, but also we have the impacts on the livelihoods on the communities, mostly the fisheries and tourism. So maybe we can focus on the impacts on biodiversity. Ceri, I know that you have been working very closely with the mangroves. So maybe you can tell us about your trips that you have been in Galapagos. What can you tell us about that?
Well, mangroves are one of these really important ecosystems. They do a lot of jobs for the environment. We call them ecosystem functions. And some of these important jobs that mangroves do are they are nursery grounds for lots of commercially important fish species. It's where the little baby fish grow, and they're safe tucked away in the mangrove roots so they don't get eaten. So they're these important nursery grounds. You get a lot of baby hammerhead sharks in the Galapagos mangroves, but they're also really important as what we call nature-based solutions to climate change, because they're really good at locking away carbon from the atmosphere into their roots. Yeah. So they're these really important habitats, but we know that they are being impacted by plastic pollution. These tangled roots that form that lovely protective barrier for the baby fish and the baby hammerheads is also very good at catching plastic that's floating around in the water, and it gets tangled up and trapped in those roots. And what we've been finding is that means quite high levels of plastic have been accumulating there. But it's the different type of plastic to what we find on beaches. On beaches, we find these bottles and bottle caps. In the mangrove roots, it's these big plastic sheets that get caught like a carpet around the mangrove roots. And we went to one beautiful mangrove system where you look at the sand and it looks like golden, beautiful, clean sand. And then you step on it and it crunches. And it crunches because there's actually a carpet of plastic bags underneath the sand. It was absolutely full of plastic bags, which is probably impacting that really important job that the mangrove does. But that's something we're still trying to understand. But certainly when we look in the tummies of the little tiny marine invertebrates, so crabs and sea urchins that live in those mangroves, we find plastic particles within every single one that we look at, every type of species that we look at. And generally, when we're looking at all sorts of different little animals, we find plastics in 52% of them. So every species, but 52% of the individual animals.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, have also the opportunity to go there to see the reality is very powerful, and I think that you as a researcher, as a scientist, very valuable to be there and then come here and work with all the team.
And it's a really challenging environment to study, which I think is one of the things that we've been working on with this project, is how do we collect that data more efficiently? Because a mangrove is quite a complex habitat. It's hard for us to get in as scientists. And so one of the things that we had to do was design lots of new sampling techniques. So normally when we're sampling plastics in the ocean, we use these big plankton nets that we trawl across the surface. You can't do that in a mangrove because of those roots, they get in the way. So we had to come up with new pump systems to collect the water. I had students doing snorkel surveys along the plastics, and we're now trying to develop some new more rapid assessments using GoPro and technology for assessing those. So it's quite a challenging place to work, and there's a lot more we still need to do to understand these systems.
Yeah, of course. Lara, maybe talking about specifically on the microplastic, what can you tell us about?
So what we call microplastics as scientists is any items, it can be defined as any items that bigger than about 5 centimeters. Some researchers say they're bigger than 2.5 centimeters. So it can be quite small, but we can actually see and grab it easily. We can see it with the human eye. So related to what Ceri was saying about mangroves being a very challenging environment. So in 2022, as part of PPSS, me and Andrea, we actually visited one of the biggest mangrove areas in Ecuador, in the city of Guayaquil. And we had the opportunity to visit some of the preserved mangrove areas and some of the urban mangrove areas, and they look absolutely different from each other. And I say different in terms of how they look like. Of course, they all have the very complex roots and branches, but the way as they were contaminated by plastic looked different. So in the urban areas, we saw lots of packaging, lots of cups, lots of plastic bottles, for example, while in the protected areas, we saw lots of bags and lots of ropes or nets, lots of fishing gear entangled in the mangroves branches and roots. So that's also something I'm very interested in looking at, how these differences in the pollution can help us understand the different impacts in these different areas in Ecuador as well.
And just to add some preliminary results of we have a student starting to analyze some samples that we took, and we saw some maybe some mangroves that are closest in their urban areas. We can find more type of plastics, more type of additives, and more different than in the protected areas. We are finding maybe less type of plastics, but still we are finding a lot of microplastics, and mainly, as we say before, fragments and also fibers are the main type of plastics that we find. And all of this information, when we are analyzing our samples, help us to tell, okay, maybe where this is coming from. Because if we find a bottle, as we say before, okay, we can know where it might come from. But when we have these tiny plastics that Lara told us that are very, very small, it's very hard to tell where they come from. So that's why we analyze the size, the color, the type of polymers to understand better what is happening in these amazing ecosystems.
Thank you so much, girls, for this great explanation. I think that it's also valuable to mention that our partners are working on understanding the impacts that plastic has on livelihood communities. For example, specifically in Peru, our partners are focusing on fishing communities in Lambayeque, in San Jose specifically, because these people depend on small-scale fisheries for their food and livelihoods, but at the same time they produce solid waste that ends up affecting them because there's a lack of sanitary landfills. So maybe there's a need of integrate a management plan that addresses both vessel and land-based solid waste generation. So entering to the last topic that we have, Ceri, could you tell us what kind of solutions we have been working in the PPSS project?
Yeah, so it was really important for us with this programme of research not just to list all of the problems with plastic. We wanted to try and come up with solutions to plastic pollution, but we're not talking about completely removing plastic as a material. That's not a likely scenario. Plastic is an incredible material with lots of very useful uses and applications, but we don't want plastic washing up on beaches. We don't want to be finding plastic waste in the stomachs of fish in beautiful parts of the world. So what we really need is a much more sustainable plastics economy. But that's quite a big ambition, and what we've been trying to do in this project is to tackle little different bits of how a sustainable plastic economy might look like. So firstly, how do we better stop plastic entering the oceans as waste? How do we manage waste better? How do we map the flow of plastics in a way that we can track where it goes and stop that from happening? Can we have more circular approaches to plastic use? And what we mean by circular is that it's continuously reused as a material so that it doesn't end up being a waste product. You're trying to remove waste from the system. But also, can we come up with other materials for some of those more throwaway uses of plastic, which are not plastic, that are more bio-based and don't have an impact when they're left as waste? So there are many different approaches that we've been looking at in this project, because we're going to need lots of different solutions, not just one solution to tackle this big global problem. And obviously this is a global problem, not just happening in the Eastern Pacific.
Lara, I know that you've been working with bioplastic specifically. What can you tell us about it?
So as part of PPSS, we have an industry partner called Materium. And Materium is formed by material developers, scientists, and also business experts. So the whole idea is to find solutions that are inspired by nature, so using materials that are available in nature to try and find good alternatives to the conventional plastics that are from petroleum or gas. So within PPSS, Materium, together with Exeter, we have been working on this, what we call bioplastics. So it's a plastic film that has the potential to replace some single-use plastics, as I mentioned before, such as plastic bags that we use, well, not in the UK, but in Latin America, it is still very common to use plastic bags for carrying your groceries. And we know that can be a big environmental problem. So the idea is that we can replace the conventional plastic bags by these biomaterial bags. And what we do here in Exeter is just to make sure that these new materials, as they are used by people and then as they are discarded, they don't represent a new threat to the environment. So we're going to try and make sure that it is environmentally safe.
And well, another area of the project that is focusing in the solution is first to try to understand what is happening in the island. So as we say, a lot of plastic is coming from the ocean currents, but as well Galapagos is a marine reserve that is inhabited. So there is people living in these amazing islands, and as well, if they are living there, they are consuming and producing waste, right? So as part of the project, we wanted to map the plastics inside the island to know what is happening. So in Santa Cruz, which is the island that has the most inhabitants, we did this mapping. So first we identified where it's plastic coming from to the island. So we try to identify the imports of, as Lara mentioned, this is mainly like single-use plastics because we have a lot of packaging coming into the island, and to identify the content and lifetime of the products and for how long people is using these items that come into the island. And then also we wanted to identify what is happening in the streets of Santa Cruz. So we perform a street surveys. So basically we did a litter picking expedition in the Galapagos. So we went with our team and we did surveys in different areas of the island, including urban, rural, and the protected areas that are part of the national park, to identify if there was plastic in these areas and how that relate with the amount of people that it was in these areas. Also, this data is still being analyzed. We are still analyzing to try to understand what is happening in the island. And then we also perform some audits to the grocery shops to know what they are selling, to try to identify all of this. So we have the imports, we have what is in the streets, we have what people is selling in the stores, and finally we did we wanted to know what people is consuming in their daily life. So we used an ethnographic tool, which was like a plastic diary, where people for 3 days were writing and identifying what plastics they were using. So with all of this information, we want to know, okay, what is happening with the plastic in the island, to know the flows, to know what is coming, what is being used, and what is being wasted. And then the final part is that in November we are going to like kind of close this loop and know what is happening in the landfill in Santa Cruz in Galapagos. So the idea is at the end, with all of this little information, we will understand better all of the plastic flows in Santa Cruz. And just to add, the idea having all of this information, we can wrap up to what Ceri said, to identify circular economy strategies in the island. And I mean, of course, we did in Galapagos because it's an amazing place, but at the same time, it's because it's an island and you can control what is coming and what is going out. So this is also an amazing way to do this.
Yeah, I think it's great, and this circular system is maybe the novelty of our project, because we are considering all the part, and maybe our final goal is not letting the plastic reach the ocean finally. So thank you very much, girls, for this amazing entertainment and engaging conversation. I believe that the PPSS network, from all of its perspective, is doing a great job to give a voice to the ocean, but also to the biodiversity. I think that maybe our final goal is to reach the general public, but also to the policymakers, because they are finally who make the decisions. And I know that our job is supporting the global treaty, and that's amazing. So maybe, Ceri, can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, I think we're very lucky in this programme that we have some direct contact with people making really important decisions. So we're working very closely with the Galapagos National Park, who've really supported this work and are really engaging with our findings. And they've actually been developing a plastic management plan for the park based on a lot of our research. So that's really positive that we've had an instant impact there. But we're also lucky in that the delegates leading the global negotiations for the Global Plastic Treaty are based from Ecuador. And again, we have direct contact with those delegates to the Global Plastics Treaty, and they are using our evidence in those really important negotiations to try and come up with some global agreements on how we better use plastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great to finally have an impact on the policy decisions, but also in the public. So thank you so much, girls, for being here. I think that is our first chapter of this PPSS podcast. So I'm very glad for being here in Exeter with you, having this conversation. And finally, the name of our project, that is Pacific Plastic Science Solutions, is having an incredible result. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.